Seguro va a ser muy interesante para nosotros hoy. María Papas tiene una larga y extensa trayectoria siendo secretaria y dentro de la política de Chicago, en Illinois. Así que les agradezco a que la recibamos con un fuerte aplauso.
Hola, hola.
Okay. All right. Hey, you guys that are drinking coffee, come over and sit down. And quit talking, because this is going to be fun. Okay. If you don't have microphones and you need it translated, there are 50 over there, so I suggest that you go and get them. So, my name is Maria Pappas. I am a 74-year-old gray-haired grandmother who's been doing this for 32 years in what is the county of Cook. It is approximately the 16th largest country in the world because under us sit 2,500 governments. So what do? We have the largest public hospital system in the world. We have the largest jail system in the world. We have 118 children under the age of 18 waiting trial for murder. So what does all this have to do with property taxes? It has a lot to do with it because it influences how they go up and how they go down and who wins elections and who loses elections. So it costs us, for 22,000 people awaiting trial, it costs us about $50,000 a year to house a prisoner. In Cook County, the food contract for prisoners alone is $30 million a year. And there's several elected officials. There's 17 elected officials who govern the county, and then there are elected officers. We manage the largest court system in the world. There are 365 judges that don't do anything except listen to criminal cases and civil cases. We also manage the forest preserves, which is 68,000 acres of property, the botanical gardens, the zoo, which is really fun. This time of year, it's all lighted up and people get to go and see it with these interactive lightings. And the entire criminal and medical justice system. So if anybody wants to do anything in the United States, they come to Cook County because Cook County is the demographic that is really expressing what's happening in America. And for Latinos and Hispanics, you must know that it is important that the African American population in Chicago in the county of Cook has decreased and the Latino population has increased, which has extraordinary implications for the next election in May. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. So, you know, I've been here, like I came last night, and we had 14 of these countries, and Michael and the OAS came to Chicago, and we talked to them about what we do. But last night, everybody's saying to me, what's going on in Chicago? So, the most interesting and newsworthy thing that is happening in our city, which is going to affect what happens nationally, is a new law which is called no bail bond. So if you commit aggravated battery, aggravated driving under the influence, arson, burglary, drug-induced homicide, kidnapping, robbery, second-degree murder, or threatening a public official, you can go to court and there will be no bail. In other words, you don't have to pay any money to get out of jail. You're free. And this has caused a lot of havoc. Isn't she beautiful? I used to look like that. So you can get out of jail immediately. You can get out of jail immediately. And this has caused huge problems in the city because the city as you see with the current elections, the Biden and Trump factions, they're divided. And how is it divided? There is a progressive movement which is defund the police officers, and there is another movement which says we need more police. What's happening currently is there is a stand down, and all of this affects our property tax system because it has to do with money. The stand down is the following. There is a shooting, and the police don't show up until all of the shooting ends. It's called stand down. And the third thing that is dramatically affecting us is the number of new cannabis shops. So I'll give you an example. I'm Greek, yo soy griega, and on Halsted Street, there are a number of Greek restaurants. So one of the Greeks who died, his son didn't want to take over the business, and he sold the property, and the property is now a cannabis shop. So what's happening all over the country is that at the cannabis shop, the drug dealers come in at night and they stand in line and they tell the people, don't go into the cannabis shop, I'll sell you the drugs cheaper. And it's created a war zone between gangs and legitimate cannabis owners. And as a consequence, the Greek restaurants that used to be open until 12 and 1 o'clock at night, they all close at 9 o'clock because of the gang activity. And you see this happening in neighborhoods throughout Chicago. There is a website. I suggest that you have friends or relatives in Chicago. You go to it. It is called cwb.com. cwb.com, Chicago. It's an amazing website because the news media who have an avid interest in promoting business in the city and getting Sterling Bay and various companies to stay in the city are leaving. And so what they do is they talk to the major news media and tell them, don't print what's happening. So what's happened is there's an alternative website, it's cwb.com, and on this website you get the truth about what's really happening with regard to crime. So I'll tell you a funny story. I live in the Ritz-Carlton in Water Tower. And at 3 o'clock in the morning, there's some people in the lobby, and 3 guys came in, one with a rifle and one with 2 guns, and they tried to burglarize 2 people that were sitting in the lobby. They got away, they went to their rooms. The 3 guys went outside, they carjacked a car, drove to Lakeshore Drive, wrecked the car, left the car there, ran around, found another car, escaped, and the police showed up at Water Tower an hour and 15 minutes later and went to the room of the people who were burglarized, and the police said, have you been bodily harmed? And they said no. And they said, well, if you haven't been bodily harmed, then take an Uber to the police station and report the crime. This is happening all over the city because everyone who is in office wants to say that crime is reduced. So you have the police in charge not reporting. That incident was never reported. It was reported on the alternate website. Yesterday, an African-American minister, and there's a group called Black Men United. Black Men United is very, very strong in Chicago right now. It is 75 men who combined spent over 150 years in jail for rape, murder, robbery, and burglary. They are still connected to the gangs, but they have created an organization where they go out into the community and are doing good work. And I am very close to them. We have an organization, and I think we can get some stuff started here in Mexico if I can just get the right cities, or any South American countries for that matter. We are connected with an organization called Vision America. Vision America and Black Men United are working, and what we do is we receive from CVS, Costco, Walgreens, every major company in America. We have a 200,000 square foot warehouse. And what we do is we receive products from them. They send us products as tax exempt. So we just sent furniture, television sets, sanitizers to the Ukraine. We go into various underserved communities in Chicago and give away these products. It's interesting because I go in as a white woman into these black ghettos. But Black Men United calls ahead of time and tells the gangs, Pappas is coming in, don't bother her, which is very interesting. You have to know when you're in politics who you associate with today that makes your life safer. So if you get to come to Chicago, I would love to take you into the African American neighborhoods. My office, and I have been there since, in politics since 1998, I have an unusual background. I grew up in a town of 2,000 in Wheeling, West Virginia, which is like a ghetto. It's like a ghetto. It's a coal mining ghetto in West Virginia. And in 1972, I left and I went to Chicago and I got a PhD in psychology, because in those days, women couldn't get into law school. So I spent 10 years doing that. I then got a law degree because I was testifying in court on criminal cases. I got a law degree and I segued into public policy as a legislature, dealing with jails and hospitals. And then my predecessor, the treasurer of Cook County, was indicted and he was going to jail. And the Democratic powers that be in Chicago called me and said, you need to be the next treasurer. The problem was, when that occurred, the office had no Y2K compliance, no email system, no website, it had 6 offices and 258 people. 6 offices and 258 people. So why is it that now we've had over 127 countries come to visit my office? Why? I will tell you why. We are now operating with 59 employees in one office. 59 employees in one office. And I'm going to go through state of the office in a minute and tell you how we were able to downsize and why. Right now, there is a crisis in Chicago. So let me tell you the crisis. You all know what an assessor is. The assessor assesses the property, right? Okay. The bills in Chicago right now are 6 months late. They're 6 months late. They were due August 1st, but because of the extraordinarily high number of appeals, and because the assessor decided to reassess all commercial properties during COVID and reinstitute a formula where commercial properties were valued higher than residential properties, everything is 6 months behind. So, for the first time in the history of this county, the bills are going to be due on December 30th. Now, how am I combating that? I should be mailing the bills December 1st. I'm here. I probably have to leave on Thursday because Thursday morning at 6 o'clock, the bills won't be received in the mail until December 1st. But at 6 o'clock in the morning on Thursday, all 1.8 million parcels go online in my office, and I make an announcement that anyone who wants to can go online and pay, can pay on the lockbox, can come to my office. So this is good, and it's part of the technological advances that we've made. You know, when you're in government, it is impossible not to have employees who undermine you. It is impossible to have employees who don't steal. So I want to briefly tell you a story. I was lecturing in Lithuania, and my chief called me and said there's some funny activity on someone's computer, because we have about 200 cameras monitoring everything that's going on. So I said, call the federal government, and they came in. They removed his computer. They took and they said, we're taking it to an undisclosed facility. And after they got to the undisclosed facility, they realized that he took $5.5 million worth of live checks in the office, and he refunded them, sent them to a guy who was going to collect 40% of the $5.5 million because it was inside information. There's another incident. I was in a yoga class, and I'm working out, and all of a sudden the phone rings, and they said, you've got to get to the office, the website's slow. I'm like, really? It's slow? Well, when you do what I do, you know it's slow because somebody's inside there. So again, by the time I got to the office, which was 5 minutes later, there were 17 FBI agents in the office. And what happened? They said, we're taking the computer and we'll call you in 10 minutes. They take the computer, they leave, they call me in 10 minutes and they said, you have a professor from the University of Chicago who's Chinese, who's inside your website. I'm like, seriously? They said, yeah, he's downloading everything that you have. The numbers that you have, the addresses that you have. I said, well, what are we going to do about it? They said, well, we can't tell you what we're going to do. So for 3 weeks, they monitored him, they followed him, and I'm telling you this because if you think that anything that you do on your computer is confidential, it's not. I have had to use the federal government to come in so many times when someone's stealing or trying to take something from me. So at any rate, they came back in 3 weeks later and they said, we've solved it. We can't tell you how we've solved it, but we have a similar problem in Florida, and they left for Florida. I make about $125,000 a year for what I do. That's nothing. I could be a CEO and making more than $500,000. But my top deputies make between $185,000 and $200,000. Why? Because it's COVID, it's post-COVID, everybody's poaching employees, and it is impossible, almost impossible to keep someone who you say must come to work 9 to 5, because the new slogan in America is work from home. Most government employees in the city of Chicago and Cook County are not in the office on Friday or Monday. They just don't come in. They only work 3 days a week, and the tragedy is that all the restaurants in Chicago now in the business district are closed because they just don't want to work 3 days a week, so everybody's eating in cafeterias. You know, you have to know when you're in government, or if you're working for someone in government, when to say no. You have to know when to say no. So I'm going to give you an example. I just finished an election. I'm the highest vote getter in the county. I always get over 1 million votes. Nobody beats me, but if you're doing it for 32 years, the 1 million people that vote for you know you. They've met you. If you've done good outreach, you've met all of them. So I get calls, you know, I got a call from the largest corporations in the city who said to me, Maria, you're the only candidate who should be mayor. And I got offered last week as a starter $15 million to get into the Chicago mayor's race. So I was on radio and they said to me, you would be the best person to be the mayor. Why don't you want to run for mayor? And I said, I don't want to be mayor because I would win. I would win. I would win the mayor's race. So you have to know what the danger is of moving into an area that you know is impossible to cure. The crime is out of control, and the debt, as you will see later in my studies, is also out of control. So how can you take over a city where 4,000 police officers in the last 2 years have retired? 4,000, no one wants to be a police officer. They had 440 people show up to take the test to become a policeman, and out of the 440 that showed up, 4 passed the test. 50 people total passed the physical and the written test, and on the day they were supposed to show up, 5 of the 50 showed up. No one wants to be a policeman. Severe, severe, severe problem in the United States. I love Greece. I'm Greek. I go to Greece often. I'll just tell you a funny story. George Papandreou is a very good friend of mine, the prime minister, and he got elected, and he said, you have to come here right away, and you have to help me straighten out Greece, and it's a mess, and blah, 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 blah. So I went to the finance office, and I went back to George. I said, George, you got a problem. He says, what's the problem? I said, Greece has not billed property taxes for 2 years. He said, you got to be kidding. He calls the finance minister, Papa Constantino. He says, Maria's here. She says, we haven't billed property taxes for 2 years. He calls the guy under him. He calls him back. He says, you know what? We haven't billed anybody. So it's amazing at the top levels of government that these sort of things happen. So where am I and what am I doing and why am I here? We now, with 127 countries that have come in, have also created a think tank. I have a think tank in the office, and I hired the brightest and best of investigative reporters. I hired 2 mapping specialists. University of Chicago gave me 5 free interns, and I hired an MBA in public policy from the University of Chicago. So, you know, what? Why would you do this? You're an elected official. Why would you create a think tank that is now competing with every think tank in the country? Our last study had 800 news media outlets nationwide, including New York Times, Bloomberg News, is starting to cover what we're doing. I think that's why I'm the keynote, and I will begin to tell you about that in a minute. I'm going to talk 5 minutes about my state of my office, and then I'm going to tell you about my studies. But on a personal note, listen to me. There's nobody in this room who's 74 years old other than me, so I want to just give you some healthy personal information. This is a very difficult time in human history. I wake up in the morning and I have to have a policeman with a gun meet me. I don't go anywhere unless I have 1 or 2 policemen with me, because the situation in Chicago has become immensely dangerous. And it's not just that somebody like the lady in the gold sweater says, I'm going to come and shoot you. It's the stray bullets. It's the stray bullets that are happening, which is frightening. We live in Water Tower, Pearson in Michigan, the most renowned building in the city of Chicago. And we cannot go outside at night. My husband cannot take the dog and walk the dog across the street because it's that dangerous. So we, and I hope it doesn't happen to you, have become a fear-based city. We are afraid to go out at night. We are afraid we're going to get COVID. We're afraid what's happened with the vaccine. We're afraid for our children. So you now have a psychological effect on everyone living in the city, which is a microcosm of what's happening in the country, who live with fear. And that's frightening, because the child who's growing up today doesn't grow up the way I grew up or the way you grew up. We are creating a generation of kids, most of whom in Chicago. And I'll give you an interesting statistic. Last year, in the state of Illinois, 26,000 kids under the age of 18 had a child. Half black, half white, and Mexican. And under the age of 13, 363 children had a child. So you have to ask yourself, what's happening? I did a study years ago, which you can find on the internet. We are creating, without realizing, a cycle of poverty and crime. You have a 13-year-old who gets pregnant. She drops out of school. There is no father in the home because, unfortunately, we reward mothers in America. We reward mothers in America for keeping the father outside the house, because if the father's outside the house, she gets a public aid check. So now you have a massive generation of young kids who are growing up in fatherless environments, which leads to, what's the cycle? The cycle is uneducated, the father's gone, drugs, poverty, and it's a cycle. Because now that 13-year-old who had that child, that is the same child that is engulfed by the gangs. The gang says, you don't have a father, let me embrace you, let me love you, let me care about you, and let me tell you, to get into the gang, you must go to the corner of Chicago and Michigan and shoot 3 people, and then we will bring you into the gang. And it's happening constantly. So for me, I have become, I'm from a family of priests on the island of Crete, but I have become, because when you're in the top position of authority, everybody comes to you for advice. Nobody calls and says, Maria Pappas, do you need anything? Nobody. It just doesn't work that way. What they do is they call and say, can you do this? Can you do that? Can you do this? Can you do that? I think when you're in office and you're my age, you find your God. You find your God. And this is important. You find your God means you find out who you are, what matters, and how you're going to handle the enormous stress of what's happening in our world. So let me tell you, you're going to get to cookcountytreasure.com. This is an amazing website. Can you imagine that I get as many as 2 million visitors a month? 2 million visitors a month to a website. Why would 2 million people, Michael, it's 11:01. Can I have 10 more minutes? Yeah? Speed it up? Get the presentation up? Okay. We're going to skip State of the Office. Go to cookcountytreasure.com. It's up in 127 languages. Go to the bottom and look at State of the Office. It will tell you how we went from 258 people down to 59 and how we are getting 2 million people on the website and what we are seeing. I'm going to leave that part of the presentation out because we're running late, and I'm going to switch to the studies. So there are a number of studies. Beyond the 2 that I'm going to explain today, there are several others on the website. One is the voting study, which you need to understand. The voting study. The voting study shows that in the last elections, over the last 10 years, less than 25% of the people who are eligible to vote, vote. Less than 25% of the people who are eligible to vote, vote. This is a frightening figure because when I come here, everybody says to me, what's happening in the election? What can happen in the election if all the people who are complaining don't vote? You need to look at that and papastudies.com on cookcountytreasure.com. You also need to look at the 20-year history of property taxes, and then there is a debt study, Listen to me. This is one of the most important studies that's been done nationwide. We take all 526 governments and we show the unfunded pension liability. The unfunded pension liability for the 526 governments in Cook County is about $186 billion. Why is that important? It's important because whoever comes into office, before they can build a road or a school or a police station, they must first feed in to the pension system. So let's talk about my latest studies. This is the first one. It's redlining. Okay, we're going to give it to you in Spanish. Okay. This study started with mapping scavenger properties. Every 2 years we sell things that are delinquent. Every year we sell tax properties. And what we've been able to do in this is identify, you're going to see here, you see all these little dots? These are properties in the city of Chicago and the county of Cook that 70 years ago were redlined. What does redline mean? Redline means that 70 years ago the bank said, don't give these Latinos and don't give these banks loans. So now you have no generational wealth because these little dots are the same dots that show that the properties 70 and 80 years ago that weren't given loans are now abandoned commercial properties. This large map of the United States are the red dots where banks were told, don't give money to Latinos, don't give money to blacks, don't give money to minorities. So what we're finding in this is that those same properties that were redlined, get this, are the same properties where 80% of the violent rapes, murders, and robberies are occurring in Chicago. The abandoned properties that were redlined. Additionally, the same properties that were abandoned and redlined are the same properties that 400,000 African Americans and Latinos have left the city. Why? If you have a kid who's 3, do you want them in a neighborhood that has 80% of violence? And it connects to redlining. It connects to redlining. If you look here, you'll see that the pink or red areas are the most hazardous areas. I don't have a lot of time, but we're going to go to a page here that says in years ago, they said, it is unthinkable that we sit by and let the north side where I live, a white area, one of the finest in the entire world, to be occupied by a alien race. In other words, don't allow blacks and Latinos to move into white neighborhoods. So what does this mean? This is a loss of generational wealth. There aren't many Latinos who own homes. There aren't as many blacks who own homes because when they did get the opportunity to own a home, what happened was they couldn't afford the high interest rates and they defaulted and the bank took these properties back. So these are all maps of what happened. When we did this study, you know, when you do a study, you can't just do Chicago. If you want national press, we also did Philadelphia and Detroit and showed that the same thing is happening there. So we are making recommendations. We are making recommendations to the state legislature to change these things, but we could have never gotten the state to make the changes unless I had had this team of reporters working on this study, which is actually a 40-page in-depth study. And believe me, it's had major implications. Bloomberg Tax Service, New York Times, Associated Press, they're all running this story because the buzzword is equity. Right now, it's about equity and who has equity and who doesn't. I'm going to move on because we're short on time. The second study that we did is an amazing study. If you know, the largest newspaper in Chicago is the Chicago Tribune. It is the Chicago Tribune. A hedge fund off of Wall Street came in and scooped it up, bought it, fired their best reporters, and took the real estate and is now selling off the real estate. One of the pieces of real estate that they're selling is going to become a casino. And there's a lot of politics involved. But I saw this as an opportunity. When they fired their best reporters, I hired them. I have in my office the best investigative reporters in the city who are doing these studies, and we're going to turn out 2 more. We're doing one on, which you'll find interesting. There's 80,000 parcels in the city of Chicago that pay no taxes. And we are looking nationwide at all properties that pay no taxes because they are 501c3s, they're hospitals, they're universities. We're looking at the amount of money in their trust funds. Harvard, for example, has 20 billion and they pay no taxes. Northwestern University has 30 billion, University of Chicago has 50 billion. They pay no taxes, but they want the government services. So now we decided to look at who comes in and buys these properties in Black and Latino neighborhoods. It's amazing. What we uncovered is, and I'm gonna move down here quickly because Michael's making faces and I have to finish soon. Look at this. This is a list of buyers in Cook County. The buyers in Cook County are actually hedge funds on Wall Street. So they come in, they buy the property. They buy it. The government gets the property. This is an 8-year study. The government gets the property, and they get all these 526 governments get $228 million. 2.5 years later, the hedge fund comes in and says, I don't want it. I don't want it because when you sold it to me, you made a mistake. You said the house had a toilet and it didn't. You said that there was air conditioning and there wasn't. And as a consequence, when they return the property to me after 3 years, the hedge fund, who created a law in 1930, makes 54% interest off of Black and Latino neighborhoods. 54% interest. This was an amazing study because these guys and these hedge funds operate throughout the United States. They operate throughout the United States and they're literally raping Black and Latino neighborhoods. So I'm just going to say 2 more things. I don't know if you have international radio, but I have a Black Talk radio show. You believe that? Radical Black Talk Radio. It's called WVON. I am the most popular talk show host in Chicago. People love me. I have gray hair, I wear crazy jackets, I tell funny stories. And I, every Monday, go on radio, and we have a system where people, especially Latinos, at closings, here's what happens. They go to a closing, and at the closing, the mortgage company pays the taxes. They set up an escrow. But now they get a bill. They get a bill from me, and they don't know. They forgot that the mortgage company paid, so they pay. So I'm sitting with 2 payments on a piece of property. I'm sitting with an extra $79 million going back 20 years, where mostly Latinos and blacks who don't understand the system have overpaid. So I go on the radio every week. I'm doing Black Talk Radio, and it's going so well. I'm going to have my own Hispanic radio station within 2 weeks, where I go on and people call in, they give me their address, and I tell them whether or not they have any money. So I'm excited about that. I hope that you will get to my site. It's up in 108 languages. We've had over 500,000 downloads in foreign languages. I know it is, hold on. It's 11:12. I'm available. This is Maritza Fitch. Maritza's in my office until I learn Spanish very well. She's here. She will accommodate you. We are willing to share any data that you want. We are willing to share the presentations in Spanish that we did when the OAS 14 delegates came to Chicago. This presentation and our studies are in Spanish. Maritza will give you her card. We welcome visitors. I love you guys, and I'm sorry that on Thursday I got to leave because nobody knows I'm here. And if they knew I was here and the bills weren't out, I would be in deep shit. So I'm out of here Thursday. I love you guys. I hope to see you again. Thank you. Thank you.
Quiero agradecer a la secretaria del Tesoro de Chicago, María Papas, de parte de los organizadores de esta cumbre. Los invitamos a conocer en detalle la información que nos deja. Esta presentación que ustedes vieron la pueden encontrar en la página web. Tiene muchísima más información de los estudios, pero en esta sesión en particular del uso y aprovechamiento de los datos catastrales y registrales, pudimos ver tan solo una pequeña muestra.
He's telling you how wonderful I am. They want a coffee break. So.
Solo una pequeña muestra del uso de la información catastral y registral en Chicago. Entonces los invitamos a verla. Pero on behalf of the organizers, Maria Papas, we're glad to have you with the network here with us up to Friday, not Thursday, right?
Thursday.
So here's a token of appreciation for you.
Thank you. Yeah, let's take a picture. Story. The largest owners of land in Cook County are Polish, believe it or not. Polish own more land than anyone, and they just made me Polish Citizen of the Year. How about that? Thank you. Thank you.